Hello, this is Daniel from sound.headquarters.inc. In today's video, we're doing this very cool custom build for an awesome client. Here's a little sneak peek of the space that we created for him. He has a really nice listening room / home office where he does his writing. And I'm going to show you step by step everything we did to build all of these acoustic elements and install them for his room. So we had some thicker panels and very thick bass trap overhead clouds that we did for this client. So we were starting off with our 1x4x8 lumber, getting all those cut to all the sizes that we had for our 4-inch thick panels. And then we also had plywood that we ripped to 6 inches to make the bass traps. So we're using my 16 gauge brad nailer to nail all of these panel frames together. And I'm just doing a middle brace at the rear of all of these 4-inch panel frames. So I'm just doing 3 nails per corner, making sure that everything is nailed together nice and square. Here is the 5/8 plywood that we use. My friend Jamie's helping me out build these clouds, and we're just kind of prototyping and developing it as we went along. So we knew that our final size was going to be 2 by 8 feet by 6 inches deep, and we were going to do 1 layer of Rockwool Comfort Board 80, and then 1 layer of Rockwool Safe and Sound to make up the 6 inches of absorption for those big overhead bass traps, which you'll see come together in a little bit. So starting off with some of the upholstery here, we ended up actually redoing the upholstery for this job. We did 1 layer of this white upholstery, and then when we showed the client, he was happy with it, but then when we did the bass traps, which we had to upholster in black first so that the bracing wouldn't be visible through the fabric, and then upholster the white on top. Once we did that, the look that we achieved with that was just something that we wanted to achieve for the entire room as a whole. So we ended up adding black upholstery on everything first, and then upholstering in the white to give us that fully opaque white fabric. And this is just how the upholstery is coming together here. So I do 1 staple on each corner, make sure that I tension to make sure that everything is nice and taut across the front face of the panel, and just go around with my staples and my scissors there to trim up the excess. Here is a big 3x6 panel that is going to be on a slanted section of the wall, and you can see I stapled the fabric in so that it holds the insulation in. Since we're going on top of this with another layer of fabric, I used that layer of fabric almost as like a net, so that way the insulation doesn't sag through the panel. So I'm just going ahead and getting that one upholstered as well. And now we can continue on our big bass trap framing. So I'm doing 1 middle brace, and since these are 2x4 or 2x8 feet wide, I'm using that middle brace to break where the 4-foot pieces of insulation will meet up. And then I did another middle brace to make sure that each of those 4-foot sections of insulation don't sag. And you can see I left like 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch from the front face of the panel. That way the fabric can lay nice and flat, and you don't see any of the bracing or anything when you're looking up at the clouds. So we're going ahead and getting some of our markings for the installation in here. And this large section here is getting that 2x8 foot panel. And here is where that we're getting a 2x4 foot panel on the bottom section of this slanted wall here. So we're just using L brackets. This client wanted to have an air gap behind all of his panels to increase the effectiveness just in the lower registers. So we used the L brackets to achieve that, and then we used spacers. So for the 2-inch panels, we did a 1-inch air gap, so we used a 1-inch spacer before we screwed the panels into the L brackets. You can see right there, I'm just using my speed square, which has a 1-inch side, so we used that as the spacer. And then for the 4-inch thick panels, we used a 2-inch air gap, and the client made a little 2-inch block of wood that we used to go around the room and create our 2-inch air gap. So you can see those panels are up with the 2-inch gap. And now we're getting started on the ceiling. So here's the strapping that the client put up into the ceiling. It's just a 1x4 pine that's already primed white, and then they screwed those into the roof joists. That way, whenever we put the hardware into these big clouds right here, you can see they're upholstered in black already before we upholster them in the white. And since these are very large, very heavy, we have to have that strapping that's screwed into the joists above in the ceiling. That way, we're not relying on drywall anchors. These would not hold the drywall anchors. It's crucial that we're in joist so that these are going to be safely secured overhead. And we used locking carabiners and really large and heavy-duty threaded eye hooks to go into the panel and to go into the strapping that's screwed into the joist. There you can see my friend Jamie helping out with some of the rest of the hardware. And we're just getting, for this hardware, we're just using drywall anchors. Since the 2x4 foot panels are light enough, they're not so heavy that we need to hit joist or stud or have strapping for these panels. So each L bracket gets 2 drywall anchors. Now you can see we're putting some of that hardware into the strapping in the ceiling. Jamie's putting in the eye hooks with that locking carabiner. So it's just a threaded bolt essentially, and we can thread it open to accept the cloud, and then we thread it closed to make sure that it's secure and it's never going to come off. So you can see that big screw hooks there going into the strapping, and we want to make sure that's nice and secure. And since the strapping is screwed into the joist at multiple locations, this is more than stable enough. So there's Jamie drilling out on the clouds. We got all of our measurements, drilling out on the clouds for the screw hooks that are going into the clouds. And we're using longer screw hooks to go into the cloud here, just to make sure that we get lots and lots of thread screwed into these clouds, just to ensure that the hardware is nice and strong and that these clouds are going to be safely overhead, since they're so large and so heavy. And we have 3 of them right above the center of this listening room. It's crucial that for every job we do, but for this one especially, since these are very large and heavy, that these are above and beyond when it comes to safety and when it comes to the rating of all the hardware. We want to make sure that we're not taking any chances with ones this big. So you can see they're all 3 of them going up right now. We're just getting them into that locking section of the carabiner there, and then we can thread them closed. And then now it's just fine adjustments. So just to get the little fine adjustments, we're just threading certain eye hooks either further in or further out, just to give us that little levels of micro adjustment, so that all 3 clouds sit nicely with each other. So there you can see the clouds are up, and then the client and one of his workers there installing that 3x6 foot panel. And you can see they have their spacer there behind the L bracket. And that's how we're ensuring that consistent 2-inch air gap for all of the 4-inch thick panels. Now these are just some small 6-inch deep panels that the client wanted to have made for inside of his shelving unit. And then this is the triangle calculator we're doing for the base straps that are going above the alcove. That is the client's writing area where he spends most of his time working and writing. And that is where we wanted to get some overhead base strapping. So we figured out the angle and size of the triangle that we needed to make. And I just have Jamie cutting that out of some 1/2-inch ply. And now on the table saw, we are cutting the angles that we calculated on that triangle calculator into the long lengths of the 2x2. This is so that when we nail the frames together, that we have a nice flat face that matches the angle of the triangle. So that way when we upholster, everything lays nice and flat. There's going to be no bulges in the fabric, and we actually make it to the corners. So here's the first frame that we're mocking up. We're just nailing that all together, and then we'll go do a test fit. So there's the look of the triangle. And now we did have to modify this to get it to fit in that alcove just based on where these beams are. You'll see right here that we try to fit this in here, but just based on the opening of the beams, we have to cut some length off the top of this triangle to be able to get this to clear. So you'll see how we go about that in just a moment. So we ended up chopping off about 5 inches off the top of this triangle, and then just modifying how we have the bracing. Here's a little look at those panels that are fitting inside the cabinetry here. It's a little bit hard to see with the shadows in the black fabric, but these 6-inch deep panels, they have 2 layers of the Safe and Sound, and then they're just upholstered in the black both sides. And then we can kind of fit these to the back of the shelf. That way in that little alcove area, he at least has some level of treatment, and then he still has access to a lot of the shelf. So we did 3 of those small panels for him. Here is the modified base strap frame. We know that this fits, and then we added in that wider plywood bracing on the front face, so that way the insulation has something to rest on and does not sag into the fabric. So you can see we are upholstering these in black first. I'm just getting it started so I can insulate it. And then just like all the other panels for this job, it'll receive the black upholstery first to make the whole trap nice and opaque. And then when we put the white upholstery on top, that achieves the final look that we're going for. So I'm just trimming off all the excess fabric here, making sure that I have both sides stapled nicely onto the edges of that plywood triangle. And you can see we left one side raw because the way that these base traps are orientated, on the top of that alcove there, only one face of that triangle is ever going to be visible. And it's the face that's looking at us right now. And we're just about to test fit the first one. See how it looks. You see we're just lifting this into place. And you see that seam of the fabric is on just the very top. And then these can just rest on top of these beams above the client's alcove here. There we go. So now we can do some slight adjustments and then take a step back with the client, take a look at how this looks in the space. And we were both super happy with how this came together. And now we can place the other ones. So we have 3 of these going in overhead, and they're just, we measured them out to split the beams. Those beams are, there's 2 of those beams at each section, and they were 2 inches thick each. So we just measured to have those base traps split the beams so that they have 2 inches on both sides to rest on, make sure it's nice and secure. Here is the finished product. This is such a really cool listening room / home office where the client does his writing. He is an author. Please check out his books if you have the chance. His name is Claudio Gaudio. He has a book named I'll Be, and he also has a book named Texas. All of them are available on Amazon, Indigo, depending on your bookstores local to you. But if you're watching this outside of the Toronto, Canada area, Amazon would be the best place to look. And what a beautiful space, what a beautiful room, and an amazing guy. Was a pleasure doing this job for him and being invited into his home and being able to do this work for him in his space was awesome. Such a good time. Really happy with the results of this job and just the listening room as a whole. His system sounds incredible. He has these really amazing Revival speakers and great amps and all of that stuff from the hi-fi world. So it's a cool change of pace for us from the regular studio setting, but really hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Daniel from sound.headquarters.com. Please check it out. Enjoy. Thank you so much for watching. Peace out.